Welcome to Law Days and Lattes, the podcast where we blend the world of law and business with a warm cup of information and common sense. I'm your host, Sidney Wheelan, attorney, real estate investor, and business owner. Each week, we'll be your go-to source for legal insights, business advice, and so much more. Whether you're a seasoned professional, an ambitious entrepreneur, or simply someone seeking guidance, we'll have you covered. From navigating the legal landscape to empowering you with valuable business strategies, we'll explore the legal side of life and enjoy a virtual latte along the way. So, grab your favorite latte, get comfortable, and let's dive into Law Days and Lattes. Welcome to Law Days and Lattes. This podcast is sponsored by the Wheelan Law Firm of Moberly, Missouri, your go-to source for legal issues encountered by your family and your business. If you have questions about anything we discuss on this podcast, please reach out to us at www.wheelanlaw.com. Our goal is to serve you, your family, and your business professionally and with the utmost compassion and understanding. I'm your host, Sidney Wheelan. As I drive into work this morning, I'm reminded that it is campaign season and the sign wars, the ice cream socials, and the political fundraisers are in full swing. While some of us enjoy the political process on the local, state, and national level, others are sometimes annoyed by the endless campaign signs popping up on the landscape and the seemingly constant banter of political debate. Believe me when I say that I have been in both camps, and I understand both points of view. However, I believe wholeheartedly that it is not only our right to choose our political leaders, but our responsibility as well. A responsibility to be informed and to go to the polls and vote. So let's talk about some issues related to voting and running for a political office. Qualifications to run for office. First, let's be perfectly clear. The federal government and the states can and do have very different rules when it comes to qualifications of candidates to run for public office. But in general, there are some basic qualifications: age requirements for various offices, residency requirements, and citizenship status. And there are certain things that may disqualify a candidate, such as criminal convictions, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Filing procedures, filing deadlines, important dates for filing as a candidate, and consequences of missing those deadlines. There are filing fees involved and campaign finance rules. You must register a campaign committee if you meet certain financial obligations with your campaign. Appointing a treasurer and filing campaign finance reports are part of it. Candidates must think about contribution limits and disclosure requirements. There are limits on individual and PAC contributions, reporting and disclosure obligations, and penalties for noncompliance with these rules. There are also some ethical guidelines and conduct. There are rules that govern campaign behavior and rules regarding the use of public resources for campaigning. Also, certain conflict of interest and transparency rules, including the disclosure of financial interest and handling of personal conflicts of interest. Also, rules about campaign advertising, those pesky signs we see in the yard sometimes, and certain standard and regulations. The Missouri Secretary of State and its website, www.sos.mo.gov, has a wealth of information on all things related to elections and voting. It is there that you can check voter registration, find information on how to register to vote, find out information about election security, finding a polling place, and information for election candidates and poll workers. On the federal side, the Federal Election Commission's website at www.fec.gov is one source for much information, including campaign finance data, help for candidates and committees, and legal resources, including legislation, regulations, policy, and other guidance. As a practicing attorney, I'm always interested in legal cases and challenges when it comes to candidates or running for office, and there are no shortages of legal issues to hear about. Unless one has been living under a rock for the past several months, we know that a former president of the United States and current candidate for the same office has recently been convicted of 34 felony counts in the state of New York. One of the first questions that many people have asked is, how can a convicted felon still run for public office? The simplest answer is that the United States Constitution sets very few eligibility requirements for presidents. Candidates must be at least 35 years old, be natural-born citizens, and have lived in the United States for at least 14 years. There are no limitations based on character or criminal record. While some states, including Missouri, prohibit felons from running for state and local office, these state laws do not apply to federal offices. Ironically, while the television and radio and social media outlets were blasting blow-by-blow accounts of the court proceedings in New York, the Supreme Court of the state of Missouri has also been busy interpreting Missouri law regarding political candidates, particularly the eligibility of one candidate to run for elective public office in Missouri. The Supreme Court of Missouri issued its opinion on June 10th of this year in a case styled Cass County Clerk Jeff Fletcher versus Herschel Young in case number SC-100594. In that case, the Cass County Clerk filed a petition in the Circuit Court seeking a declaratory judgment as to whether Herschel Young was qualified to be a candidate for election to public office in the state of Missouri. Mr. Young had previously pleaded guilty to a felony, but then was pardoned by Governor Parsons in 2023. Facts of the case as set out in the opinion are as follows. In 1995, Herschel Young pleaded guilty to the felony of second-degree assault and was sentenced to 1 year in prison. The Circuit Court suspended execution of his sentence, what we know as an SES, and placed him on probation for 3 years. Young successfully completed his probation, and in 2023, the governor pardoned Young for the 1995 conviction. In February of 24, Young submitted a declaration of candidacy to the Cass County Clerk announcing himself as a candidate for South District Commissioner of Cass County for the August 6, 2024 primary election. The clerk informed Young his name would not appear on the ballot because his gubernatorial pardon did not resolve his disqualification under a statute in Missouri entitled Section 115.306. Suit was filed and appeals were taken, and the Supreme Court issued its final opinion on June 10th of this year. Our Missouri Supreme Court held that the Missouri statute, that section 115.306, disqualifies Young from elective public office. Missouri courts have repeatedly distinguished between a conviction and a pardon. The Missouri statute was clear. The statute stated that any individual who has pleaded guilty to a felony offense under Missouri law is disqualified to be a candidate for elective public office in the state, and Young indisputably pleaded guilty to a felony offense under Missouri law. This court must follow the legislature's clear intent based on the words used in the statute, which the legislature had not amended. We must remember that a governor's pardon excuses merely a conviction. It does not change the finding of guilt or a plea of guilty. Accordingly, the Circuit Court had properly held Young was disqualified from appearing on the primary ballot. And what about voting? Well, in Missouri, you are not eligible to vote if you are in prison or detention or jail or another penal institution. You are not eligible to vote in Missouri if you were convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor connected with voting. You are also not eligible to vote in Missouri if you're on parole for a felony conviction or convicted of a felony. If you have completed a felony sentence, including any term of incarceration, parole, supervision, probation, or have been pardoned, then you are immediately eligible to register to vote. So in the case of above, Young would be eligible to register to vote because he had been pardoned. Well, then, what are the rules of voting on the federal side of things? Well, pondering minds might ask, if a candidate for federal office is convicted of one or more felonies, is that person allowed to vote? If not, is it possible to elect a leader of the United States of America that can't go to the polls and perform one of the most important acts of the United States citizen, the ability to vote? Well, the answer to this question depends on the actual sentencing, not just the conviction. In the case with former President Trump, this candidate is registered to vote in Florida, but convicted in New York. People convicted of felonies in Florida are prevented from voting until they have completed their full sentence, including parole or probation, and have paid all fines and fees. But if a Floridian is convicted in another state, Florida defers to the laws of that state. New York disenfranchises felons only if they are in prison. So it boils down to this. This candidate will not lose his right to vote because of these convictions unless he is in prison on Election Day. In the unlikely event he were in prison on Election Day, that would put him in the extraordinary position of being deemed fit to run for an office and be voted for, but unfit to vote himself. So recently, I had an opportunity to attend a national conference for local elected public officials. It was a large group of individuals who had successfully run for office and were now leading their counties in their various offices, including circuit clerks, county commissioners, assessors, treasurers, public administrators, recorders of deeds, and prosecuting attorneys. Each of those individuals and many others who were not present in that room met the requirements and did the work to become political office holders. And while we may not be aware of all of the things we trust these folks to do, I am convinced that they have enormous responsibility to ensure that our local communities run as efficiently as possible, and that we, as citizens, depend upon their expertise, skill, and work ethic to get the job done. And while there were also state and federal politicians on the stage that week, including the President of the United States, we were reminded that it is the local men and women, leaders in our local communities that are closest to the citizens, see the problems from the ground up, and are connection and lifeline, both in good times and bad. It is imperative that each of us use the resources that we have available to us, especially during this season of campaigns, to become informed, learn about the candidates and their backgrounds, and to go to the polls and exercise our right to elect the leaders of our community, our state, and our country. Thank you for listening today. I hope that you have found this episode helpful. If you have questions about anything we have talked about on this podcast, please reach out to us at www.wheelanlaw.com. We will also put our contact information in the show notes. And as a reminder, if you hit the subscribe button, you will automatically be alerted when a new episode airs. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give us a 5-star review and share it with your friends and family. As always, my friends, grab a cup of coffee or your favorite latte, hold your loved ones tight, and have a great week.
This podcast episode contains general information for discussion purposes only. Each case is different and must be judged on its own merits. Missouri rules generally prohibit lawyers from advertising that they specialize in particular areas of the law. This show should not be construed to suggest such specialization. Nothing on this show should be taken as legal advice for any individual case or situation. This information is not intended to create an attorney-client relationship, and the listening or viewing of this podcast does not constitute an attorney-client relationship. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely upon advertisements.